Hey guys, what's going on everyone? Welcome to part 2 of the leg pad buying series. If you haven't checked out our first video about goaltending brands and series, definitely check that out before you watch this one. This is kind of like a follow-up to that. So in this video, we're going to talk about probably like the most important thing when buying a leg pad, and that's getting the right fit for you. And of course, when it comes to sizing for leg pads, manufacturers obviously some reason just kind of make it more confusing for the consumer. What I mean by that is like a 33 in Bauer can be completely different when going to a 33 in True. So the sizing is going to be a little bit different from one brand to the next. So the first part about getting the proper size leg pad is making sure that your knee lands on that knee block correctly. So what I mean by that is when you're dropping down your butterfly, you want to make sure that your knee, like the middle of your knee, is hitting roughly around the middle of that knee block when you drop into your butterfly. If you're landing a little bit on the top half, kind of like up here, and your knee kind of starts to roll off of that, that means your pads are going to be too short. And conversely, if your knee is landing on the very bottom of the stack, you're kind of like on this in-between gray area, that means the pad is going to be too tall for you. And that's just like a bit of a rule of thumb. You always want to try to kind of land somewhat in the middle here. I know some people who kind of prefer to land a little bit upper, some a little bit lower. Personally, I like to actually land a little bit higher because I like to wear a bit of a shorter pad for extra mobility. So how do we actually, measure the length of our leg to make sure that it fits the pad correctly and lands on that knee block properly? If we're unable to go to a store, because I know a handful of you guys out there who are watching, it's a bit of a drive to get out to the store to try stuff on, or you just don't have anything nearby. So if you're looking online trying to buy leg pads, the two most common measurements are something called ATK, or ankle to knee, and the other one is FTK, which is floor to knee. And what that essentially is just a measurement from your ankle bone to the center of your kneecap. And then the other one is going to be the measurement from the floor to the center of your kneecap. And of course, to make things even more confusing, each brand, when they actually tell you what measurement to use, either ATK or FTK, they kind of have different ways to measure that as well too. So most, if not all, leg pad manufacturers will have a sizing chart that you can go off of, which will either be ATK or FTK. So the first thing that you can do is actually follow that guide and start to measure your leg and just see where you fit within that chart. And just a quick note, like that chart is more of like a rough guide. There's no real better way than to just go into the store and obviously try the pads on. If you are able to go and try pads on in person, I highly recommend bringing your skates and then also your knee guards that you're wearing to size things up, because having that knee guard in there is also going to change a little bit where your knee is going to land. If you're one of those guys who are still not wearing knee guards and raw dogging it, more power to you, but rest in peace to the lower half of your body if you ever get hit down there. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to go through 3 different manufacturers, and we're going to actually measure my ankle to knee or floor to knee, whatever they recommend, and just see where I line up on that chart. And I know my sizes for those brands, so we'll actually see how accurate that is. So since all the measurements are to the center of the kneecap, we're going to pick the stinkiest, most permanent marker and just do a little line on the center of my kneecap, just for consistency's sake. So we're going to first start off with good old Brian's or B-Star and check out their fitting guide. And if we look at the leg pad section down here, with legs slightly bent, measure from the inside ankle bone up to the center of the knee. So let's go and try that out. So I got my soft tape measure. I'm going from the inside ankle bone, and it's going to run it along the shin up to the center of the kneecap. And it's going to put me about a little bit over 16 inches. And you'll see on the chart, that's actually putting me at a 30 plus 1, which is like really short, I think. So I did actually try one of these on in store at a 32 plus 1, and my knee was definitely landing pretty low on that knee block. So according to that chart, I don't say it's totally accurate. I can definitely, most likely, in a 31 plus 1. So next up, let's check out some true sizing. So they have a video on how to measure your floor to knee. So they do this a little bit weird. So you kind of like line your knee on top of your toe, and then you kind of line it straight up with a hard tape measure. Take that measurement and use it against their chart. So I'm just going to do that here. I got my tape measure, knees over toes, and kind of just seeing where that lines up. So that's actually putting me at 18 inches. And if we go on to the chart, an 18-inch floor to knee is actually going to put me in an intermediate 31. So I know that this chart is actually pretty accurate because I did try on a 31 intermediate and my knee did hit roughly in the middle of the knee block. So last up, we'll do Bauer. So they do floor to knee. They do this a little bit differently than true, where you kind of like take the measurement from kind of like the middle side of your foot from the floor up to the middle of your kneecap. And this is giving me a measurement of almost 19 inches. So that almost 19-inch measurement puts me in a small Bauer, which is a 33 plus 1. When you look at the chart, that 19-inch measurement is kind of like on the borderline of a small senior, which is a 33-inch, but it also kind of borderlines between a large intermediate, which is a 32, or the equivalent of an extra small senior, which is also 32. So as most of you know, I've been wearing Bauer for like the last 2 years, and where I line up on that chart, I'm like kind of like in between a small and an extra small. So that kind of puts me within a 33-inch and a 32. So what I prefer is to actually go a size down if I'm in between sizes. So that's why you'll see me when I wear these pads, I wear an extra small, which is a 32 plus 1. And I feel that my knee actually does land a little bit higher on that knee block, but not enough for my knee to actually slip out of that. And just wearing a shorter pad for me, again, this is just from me knowing how my body moves, and wearing larger pads before, I felt that extra mobility has just helped me so much more. And this, again, is going to come to personal preference. If you want to wear a larger pad for some more coverage, I wish I could wear larger gear, but you know, my hips have really limited mobility, and just the way that I play doesn't really allow me to take advantage of that extra thigh rise and extra space to cover the net. So I've opted to kind of stick with always on the shorter end of pads, at least for now, until I somehow gain some mobility in my 40s, but I don't really see that happening anytime soon. So what does this actually mean for people who are able to wear like a shorter pad? So when I look at the true pads, I can actually fit a 31, which is kind of cool because I can actually use an intermediate size pad. Obviously the main benefit to going to an intermediate pad size is the cost savings, right? It's like almost like half the price to get an intermediate size pad. Intermediate pads are going to measure 10.5 inches wide, whereas a senior pad is going to be a full 11 inches wide. So you are going to be losing half an inch of coverage. I actually don't think that's really a big deal because, you know, unless you're playing with like NHL quality snipers who can kind of like snipe over that half inch. And I think actually having that smaller pad is going to give you a lot more mobility to kind of move around the crease if that's something that you're looking for. So what does that mean for people who need a smaller size but don't want to use an intermediate pad? So this is the problem that I'm starting to see because I kind of fit in between sizes. If I wanted to wear a true pad, which puts me in a 31, there is no stock 31 senior. I have to go with a pro model, which allows me to customize the size to a 31 plus 2. So now that we've talked about, you know, measuring and using the chart as a rough guideline to get your pad height, that's not really the only determining factor when it comes to choosing a pad size. There's actually a handful of other things that will kind of tie into the overall height of a pad. And the first thing that I'm going to point out is going to be the thigh rise. So if we look at the thigh on this one, this is like kind of like more of like a Z-shaped profile, and this kind of angles straight up like this. So there's no curve to the top of this pad. So this is actually going to make it feel a little bit taller this way. And if you compare that to something that's very pre-curved like this, so this is another old Hyperlight one that I have, you'll see that this is like very, very curved, you know, versus kind of how straight that one is. And the pre-curved one over here is going to make it feel obviously more snug on your leg where this thing curls up. And it's also going to make it feel a little bit shorter that way too. I mean, not by much, but the way that the thigh rises are going to kind of clip together as you skate, it's going to feel different depending on what type of thigh rise flex that you have. And we're going to talk about these kind of like profiles a little bit more in another follow-up video. So that's the first thing that's going to affect the overall height of the pad. The other aspect of a pad that's going to affect the height, and this is, you're going to see this a lot more on newer lines of equipment, is going to be the boot channel here. So this is an old Hyperlight one again, so this is like 2021, I believe. This has a bit of a recessed boot channel for your skate to fit in here. The newer pads like especially the trues. These are completely flat, like a flat tabletop, like this. So what that's going to do is actually going to kind of make the pad actually kind of float on top of your skate, whereas this one, your skate can kind of settle in a little bit and make the pad feel a little bit shorter. But a lot of newer line pads, these are kind of completely filled in, and that's going to raise the pad up a little bit more. And this is why, you know, when I wear a 31 in true, it actually lines up the same as this pad, because their boot channel down here is like completely flat. And the other kind of like more subtle thing that can also affect the height of the pad is going to be the boot angle. So basically the angle of kind of like where this boot lies. So like a 90-degree boot is like kind of completely straight out. I believe this is like a 100-degree boot angle. So the more steeper the boot angle, so like 110, 115 degree boot, that kind of goes a little bit more steeper this way. This is again going to push that pad up on your leg. And a couple other things that can also affect the height of your pad. You know, you're not really going to see this too much on the Bowers here, but again, on a pad like a True or CCM, they have more of a closed-in calf wrap where it's a lot more snug, like kind of like down on this area here. And when you have a more of a snug calf wrap down on the bottom here, that's going to help you keep the pad up. So that's going to also, you know, add a little bit of height to your pad. And when it comes to using this top strap up here, if you're strapped down here like this, down to the calf, so behind the knee and down to the calf, this is also going to allow you to actually push that pad up, versus if you're to strap across like this. So usually this will come with like a little knee flap thing. If you kind of strap behind like this is actually going to make the pad not move up as much and kind of stay put, and keeping your knee within that block and not allow too much extra height in there. If you're using a pad that has something called a professor strap, or I think some brands call it a rotation strap, which is this guy over here. So if you make this really snug, again, that's going to also elevate or keep your pad a little bit higher up on your leg, because this kind of goes above your calf. So one thing that I've tried but didn't really notice too much of a difference, but I have heard a few people do this, and this is exactly why it's called the Lundy loop, because Lundqvist would take the boot strap, I don't have one connected here, and then loop it behind his skate to kind of, again, elevate that pad up a little bit. When I tried it, I didn't really see too much of a difference, but if you have a boot strap on there, and I'm just gonna grab my old skates here, usually skates nowadays will come with a little loop on the back like this, and you just loop your boot strap up like that, and that just like allows your pad to kind of just stay a little bit higher than it normally is. And last but not least, to some extent, you can always play with your toe ties, and that will actually affect how your pad can move up and down your legs. So the looser the toe tie, when you drop in your butterfly, depending on how your strapping is, you can actually kind of push your pad upwards to give you more butterfly seal. If you're to do this a lot tighter and more snug, it's really going to keep the pad pulled down and not be as high up for you. So I know that's like a lot of information to size a pad correctly. I wish those charts that they had were essentially like set in stone, and that's just pretty much how you size a pad. But all these little small factors can also affect the height of the pads. So that basically covers like your knee landing on that knee block. But the other portion that we haven't really talked about is that you know, when you look for a pad size, you'll see like a 33 and then a plus 1 or plus 2, plus 1.5. The standard is usually going to be just like +1. What that means is essentially, you know, how tall this thigh rise is. So basically the portion after the knee upwards. So if you see something that's like giving a +2, that's giving me like pretty high up. However, again, like the plus numbers, they're a little bit different from manufacturer to manufacturer again. You know, I tried on a +1 Brian's, and their thigh rise was like freaking huge, like it's just massive. It feels like a +2 at least. So that's just like another thing to really think about. I don't think it's like really a big problem if you're just going and buying stock off the shelf, because like the stock height is usually like more than enough. Obviously, if you're going full custom and customizing the thigh rise, that's something that you can just try to dial in a little bit more. But the stock stuff is actually going to be pretty dialed in when it comes to the thigh rise height. But just keep in mind that the thigh rise is going to be, again, different from manufacturer to manufacturer. So now that I've gone through wearing gear as big as possible, you know, wearing like the biggest chest protector and the largest pads that I could fit, I know a handful of you probably have that mentality of, you know, bigger is better and I can fill up more space if I had bigger gear. At least that's kind of what goes through my head. I can definitely say that I just play better in smaller gear. I do feel like maybe a little bit more naked or vulnerable on the ice with tiny gear, but just like the mobility that it gives me, I think it really helps with my game. And I really think that the previous custom set that I put together, which was a 33+1 Hyperlight 2, and with a really kind of like straight thigh rise, it just wasn't working for me. Like my knee was landing well on that knee block, like kind of like well on the bottom middle of it, but the really straight thigh rise with that added height, it just made it so difficult to do recoveries or kind of just move around and shuffle and stuff like that. So my whole mentality is kind of shifted. Instead of like wearing the biggest gear that I can find, I'm just trying to fit into the smallest gear that I can, because it just feels so much better. And of course, for us 40+-year-olds, I found that wearing that smaller gear it just made me feel a lot better on the ice and afterwards, because having that large gear kind of made me go into these like awkward positions that my body is just like not meant to go into. Again, I'm not the most flexible or athletic person, so having smaller gear has allowed me to kind of just enjoy the game a lot better. And I felt like it's allowed me to also just like learn and practice better, because I'm not constantly fighting my equipment anymore. And I don't think that really kind of like dawned on me until I kind of just did this little experiment where I bought a set of intermediate GSX pads, and I kind of abused the return policy, to be honest. I wore them on the ice for a skate, but they were all black, so you can't really see the puck marks on them. But when I put them on and I went on the ice, that movement and freedom of just like having smaller gear and not having things kind of get in the way, it just really opened my eyes to what type of gear that I should be wearing versus gear that I think I should be wearing. And what I mean by that is, you know, you're going to see your favorite goalie with like ginormous thigh rises and just like doing the splits and moving around really well. Super cool, but you know, those people are goalies who have trained professionally for their entire life. And when I see those guys play, I'm like, I want that giant, you know, all white CCM pad because he's, you know, doing the splits and making wicked saves, but that body is like completely different than I am, right? So it's really up to you just to kind of I know gear is like not cheap to come by, but if you're able to, I highly suggest, if you feel like you're kind of having trouble moving around the crease or you're kind of like fumbling around with your recoveries, you know, just try to find someone maybe that has a smaller pad size and just give it a try. And just like bring it to like a public skate and just like give it a go. I can almost guarantee you're gonna feel like so much better on the ice, being able to move around and kind of do movements a lot easier that way. So now that we've talked about, you know, trying to pick the right pad size, I know there's like a lot of factors that kind of go into that. The next thing that we're going to talk about in the next video is going to be a little bit more of the particulars. So, you know, what people would call personal preference. And we're going to talk about a few things that you might want to look for when you're looking for a pad. And I'll tell you, you know, some of the things that I look for when it comes to a pad. And hopefully we can kind of like learn from each other in terms of shopping for goalie pads, because there's a lot out there and it's really confusing, I find. And, you know, obviously you want to try to get the best bang for your buck. So the more information that you know, the better choice that you're going to be able to make for your goaltending purposes, and not just stopping pucks, but something, again, that works for your body and works well for you on the ice and feeling good afterwards off the ice. I think that's the most important thing. So we'll see you guys in that last third video where we kind of wrap up this whole session of buying leg pads. Thanks for watching.